Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio is the son of Cuban immigrants, and he joins us from Miami. Senator, what would you like to see change in U.S.-Cuba relations now?
Well, I'd like to see more of a democratic opening on the island of Cuba. Things like, I don't know, free press, stop putting people in jail because they don't agree with you politically, stop helping countries like North Korea invade UN sanctions, don't invite the Russians to open a military base 90 miles from our shores, allow independent political parties to be able to function. You know, the kinds of things that you find in virtually every country in the Western Hemisphere except Cuba and now increasingly Venezuela. That's what I'd like to see, and I'd like to see our foreign policy geared towards accelerating that.
President-elect Trump has called Fidel Castro a brutal dictator, but then he did not renew his promise to reverse President Obama's executive order reopening relations. He didn't talk about an embargo. So was that a sufficient response by your lights?
Yeah, it's no different than the one I put out. Look, I think what we need to do is understand our number one obligation is to act in the national interest of the United States of America. I believe it is in our national interest to see democracy take hold on the island of Cuba. And so we should examine our foreign policy, including all the changes that President Obama made, in that lens and through that lens.
But examine why not just reverse?
Well, as I said, there are key elements that are more important than others, so we'll look at all of them. Here's the thing people don't understand, and I've said this repeatedly. I am not against changes in U.S. policy towards Cuba. I just want to make sure that those changes are reciprocal, that they're reciprocated by the Cuban government. That was not part of what President Obama did. And I want to make sure that they are the kinds of things that help create a pathway towards democracy in Cuba. Because while Fidel Castro was 90 years old, his brother's 85. There is going to be a generational leadership change in Cuba over the next 5 to 10 years, hopefully sooner. And we need to ensure that our foreign policy towards Cuba incentivizes and makes it easier for there to be a democratic transition. That's how I would examine our foreign policy towards Cuba.
Why is this such an important issue for Americans who may not know about the history of American-Cuban relations in the Cold War?
Well, it's no longer about the Cold War. It's important for three reasons. Number one, Cuba continues to be a source of instability in the region. For example, historic numbers of people are fleeing the island of Cuba, putting migratory pressure on the United States. Number two, this Cuban government is anti-American. They allow the Chinese and the Russians to conduct espionage, electronic espionage and others from the island of Cuba. Number three, they harbor fugitives of American justice. There are people living on the island of Cuba who have violated American law, including those who have stolen millions of dollars from Medicare fraud in South Florida and have fled to Cuba. Those are three reasons right there to care about what's happening on the island of Cuba, which happens to be 90 miles from our shores, basically a neighboring country.
Let me step back and look at President-elect Trump. His position towards countries like Cuba, I want to get your sense of it, because he was asked about the U.S. force overseas, and he said our country has a lot of problems. When the world looks at how bad the United States is and then we go talk about civil liberties, I don't think we're a very good messenger. I don't know that we have a right to lecture. We're not in a position to be more aggressive. We have to fix our own mess. That seems like retreating from dealing with the kinds of problems you just outlined in Cuba. And let's speak more broadly about Syria, Russia, other countries with whom you have disagreements, and President-elect Trump doesn't seem to want to meddle.
Well, I don't know when he made that statement. I can say to you that, as I would with any other president, number one, he's been elected. I want to give him a chance to succeed. If I agree with him on a foreign policy matter, I look forward to working with his administration. If I do not agree with him on a foreign policy matter, be they a Republican or a Democrat, I'll disagree and try to offer an alternative and hopefully do what we can from the Senate to change and influence our foreign policy.